Well, let me welcome you to the second part of a triple header. It's wonderful to have double features again, especially when they are interrupted, if you will, by a wonderful conversation with the stars. I'm not going to speak about Lee Grant, although I could say volumes. Just counting all of her movies and her television shows and her documentaries is exhausting. I have about 7 pages, lists that long from IMDb. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to let John Hersker do that. John Hersker is a man I'd like to tell you a little bit about before I let him loose on Lee. When I started doing the Bryn Mawr Film Institute project, very early on I got a mysterious message from a man in Hollywood who said, "I like what you're doing. I have pictures of the Bryn Mawr Theater from the 70s. Would you like to see them?" And I said, yes, of course. And it was John Hersker who was calling me and sending me these photos. And how did he happen to have them? Well, when he was a student at Haverford College, he was the manager of the Bryn Mawr Theater. And why do you think he would have taken such a job? He's 4th generation theater operator. His great-grandfather founded an opera house in Mahanoy City. His grandfather started Hersker's movie theater in Hazleton, and he just can't stay away from a movie theater. He went on to become the executive vice president of Paramount in charge of distribution, and then the CEO of a very innovative movie theater chain, Movie Taverns, from which he has recently retired and is now, if he can be, he's a full-time board member of Bryn Mawr Film Institute. He's a great man, a gentle soul, an encouragement, a critic, all with the kindness in his heart and in his demeanor. And he has managed to lure, I can only say lure, maybe seduce, but lure Lee Grant to our fair city. And for that, I am very, very grateful. So let me introduce John Hersker.
Can everyone hear me? Yes. Thank you. Well, no, not yet. How about now? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right, excellent. Well, thank you, Juliet. I'm overwhelmed by that introduction, particularly the part about my seducing Lee Grant. I've never been in the same company with Warren Beatty before, and I'm honored to be there. I'm very honored to be on the board of Bryn Mawr Film Institute, and honored just to know Juliet Goodfriend, who is my hero for all she's done to create this marvelous institution that serves the cause of film and film education, and which would not be here, literally, without Juliet. Now, all of us at Bryn Mawr Film Institute are very proud to have with us tonight the following. An accomplished stage actress who starred in numerous Broadway and off-Broadway productions, an Academy Award-winning film actress, an Emmy Award-winning television actress, a documentary filmmaker who won an Academy Award for Down and Out in America, also a teacher of acting, and the first woman to win the Directors Guild of America Award, an accomplished author who has chronicled her amazing life in the performing arts in the second half of the 20th century, and a warm, funny, generous, caring human being. And the really amazing thing is they're all the same person. Ladies and gentlemen, Lee Grant.
Where is she? Who is she? What a woman.
We're so happy to have you here tonight. And there's so much we have to cover, much of which is covered in this very excellent book, I'm going to plug the book. I said yes to everything. We're so happy you decided to say yes to us and to be here. But before we get into all the very many aspects of your career, we just saw Shampoo, the film for which you won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress.
No, no.
You didn't win the Academy Award for Best
What
Supporting
did you
Actress?
just say?
I said that you won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress
In
for
what?
Shampoo.
Oh, Shampoo, yes.
For Shampoo. I realize there's a point at which you
No, we
lose
were-
count of the awards.
No, we were talking about, what movie were we talking about with Sidney Poitier?
Oh, In the
and
Heat of the
Rod
Night.
Steiger? We were talking about In the Heat of the Night
That's
at
right.
the table, and I'm continuing the conversation.
So tell us how Shampoo came about and how you happened to get the part in that film.
I was on Broadway in a Neil Simon play, and Warren Beatty came to see it, and he asked if I would be interested in playing with him in Shampoo, and months went by, and he was a producer, writer, and actor on that film. So he was raising money, and some studios said, yes, I'll do it, and then they said they wouldn't do it. So time came, months came, and he said, it's time, I've got the money, and he did.
And I assume he had told you what the story was, and you knew about
No.
the hairdresser. You didn't know?
Well, yeah, I knew that he was the hairdresser because he introduced me to the hairdresser who he was playing, but
And there was actually a real-life hairdresser in Beverly Hills that the part is
Yes.
based on.
yeah.
Jay Sebring?
Or Jean Chacove.
There were a couple
one
of
of the,
different ones.
Yeah, one of the two.
Yeah. So you agreed to do the film, and as you mentioned, while Warren Beatty co-wrote the script with Robert Towne and produced the film, he was not the director. The director was your friend Hal Ashby,
Yes,
and you had worked with him before?
yes. I'd worked with him on. He was editing In the Heat of the Night, and he directed. What's the next film?
The Landlord?
The Landlord. I'm very bad on names. I want to introduce Roberta Morris here, who helped me on this book, which I wrote in longhand on lined paper, and which she transcripted into the computer. And so whenever I was writing it and I'd say, oh, what was I in? Or who is in it with me? It's Roberta who I turned to and did that. You know, for those of you who read the book and those of you who didn't, there was a time in my life, in my 20s actually, when I was called in front of the Un-American Activities Committee because they felt that my husband at that time was a communist. And what happened when I went out of the committee was that I couldn't introduce a friend to another. I went up on names. I just, the fear of saying a name and causing them to lose their ability to work and to have jobs was so instilled in me at such an early age that that I have problems in public saying names. So I just wanted you to know that I remembered everything in this book, but the names. and so I want you to know that that's where that comes from.
Well, let's talk about that
Okay.
because I've heard you talk about the part that writing the book played, or the part that your memory and your difficulty in remembering things played in writing the book. So how did you come to write it, and what was that process like for you?
Well, I was afraid I was losing my memory because, and that's a secret fear, you know, that's that fear of, you know, well, I remember this, you know, why don't I remember that? And so part of the impetus for writing it was to see what I remembered. And after I found that the first scene, after the key went in and it was the breakup of my first marriage, everything was there. It was as if, you know, all these paths had opened up in me, and a childhood was there, you know, from 2 on, and the smell of the grass and the way the sky looked, and my first boyfriend, and everything was there. And it was such a relief to know that the names of things seemed to belong to the period that had to do with the committee and not with a loss of memory, which not only for everybody, but for actors, of course, is like, you know, who are you after that? So.
Sort of like getting a bit of yourself back.
It was.
Recovering
It
those
was
memories.
a huge, and I didn't write this book for publishing. I wrote this as a test for myself to find everything that I could in my life.
Now, you were born and raised in New York City. And talk about your parents a little bit. What part did they play in your development?
My mother was a Russian refugee from Odessa, and she and her sister, my Aunt Frimo, used to go to the black and white movies a lot, and they got their voices and their accents from the movies of the time. And the movies of the time, the rich ladies spoke in voices up there like that. And they said, "Lovey, where are you going today?" And their voices were high and rich. And my father came from a Bronx background. His folks came from Poland. And he was a Columbia graduate. And he went right into be the director of the YMWHA in the Bronx. So he was a very, you know, he was a guy who had acquired responsibility very quickly. And so the house was like his house, but it was run by them. and so, and I was an only child, so that the focus, not of my father, but of my mother and my aunt, was on me. And so everything that I did was, you know, frightening or wonderful or exciting. When they would want me to sing to them, you know, I'd sing "Embraceable You" to them, and my Aunt Frimo would go, "Lovey, don't embrace me, don't." I mean, they were so affected. And so when I went out and auditioned, you know, later on when I was 15, and people didn't go, don't. I mean, they couldn't care less. It was like, you know, what's happening here? How come at home, you know, I just, you know, devastate everyone with my talent. And out in the world, nobody gives a damn, you know. So it was a constant kind of, through my life, it's always been a constant, you know, well, I'm brilliant here, but I'm really dumb here. And so there's always been a kind of, yeah.
Well, was it your mother who encouraged you to go into the arts? I know you took ballet lessons at an early age.
Yes, of course.
And your stage debut was at the age of 4?
Yes, at the Metropolitan Opera House. This was my mother's, you know, dream of glory. She had wanted me to be a famous ballerina at 4. And I was on my way to the dance class at the Met when Gadi Casazzo, who was the head of the Metropolitan Opera at that time, said, you know, "Come here, you." I had short black hair, and he said, "You can be the Chinese prince in this opera, Le Roccolo." So I made my debut on the stage of the Metropolitan, and I loved it. It was fun, and it was all downhill from there.
But you caused quite a stir in your first performance, didn't you?
Well, an uncle of mine was a very bad boy, And at the while the coloratura was singing from a balcony, the tenor was singing up to her, and the bad man came with a knife to kill the tenor while he was singing. And my Uncle Joe said, you know, you should stop that bad man from killing the tenor. You should really, if you cared enough, you would stop that bad man from killing. And so that night when I went on, I shook the tenor's arms and I said, he's going to kill you, he's going to kill you. You have to, and he turned around just in time to see the knife come into his back. And of course, the audience at the Metropolitan just loved it. And I was taken away from my dressing room and put under the stage from then on.
But you did get a favorable notice in the New York Times.
Yes.
You remember what they said?
Let me see. Little Yova Haskell Rosenthal,
Which was your name at the time?
yes, is precocious. And I thought that meant precious. So I felt very precious.
So eventually, you got into acting, and you ended up with the Neighborhood Theater and Sandy Meisner, and that's really where it began for you, doesn't it?
Yes, that's really where everything began for me. Sandy Meisner and the Neighborhood Playhouse. Suddenly, it was my religion. It was, I was 17 maybe when I went in there, and it was like suddenly everything I wanted and needed was there, and I found myself there. And I stopped talking like this and started talking like this.
That was really where it came from. That was
Yes.
part of his training.
That's right, yeah.
So you landed a part in the Broadway play, The Detective Story.
Mm-hmm.
And talk a little bit about that, because that was certainly a milestone in your career.
Well, it was. The director, Sidney Kingsley, by the way, the set of Detective Story was the first time that a whole police station was on stage. And that set the tenor for all the shows that we see on television now. Every television show is made up of that same set. Mm-hmm. And it was the first time that it was on Broadway. And he wanted me to read for the ingenue mm-hmm. in it. And her lines were so silly that I said, oh, can I read for the old lady? It said 40-year-old.
Which we now know is not old.
Oh, well, it's very young to me. But it was the part of the shoplifter. Mm-hmm. And just amazing things happened. I was nominated for an Academy Award, and I won the Cannes Film Festival Award of
for the
1952. Film version? Yes, for the film version. So it was just like, what?
And you were one of, I think, only 2 cast members from the Broadway production who were in the film. Is that correct?
Three of us, yeah.
And I think the lead in the play was Ralph Bellamy?
In the play,
yes,
yeah.
And then Kirk Douglas in the film.
Kirk Douglas. It was the beginning of a long friendship.
So you had this tremendous success on Broadway. Now you're in your first film, which is the film version of that show.
Yeah.
And your director is William Wyler,
yeah.
one of the all-time great directors. What was that like to have him as your first film director?
Well, of course, he was like a daddy. Mm-hmm. He was like a good daddy. The same set that we had on stage was set up in a film place, so that it was all very familiar. And he had us who had played it on Broadway mm-hmm. there, so he just enjoyed himself.
But how did he help you adapt what was the performance for the stage to the film?
Just, smaller.
Smaller, take it down.
Take it down. But all I remember is his laughing all
mm-hmm.
the time.
Mm-hmm. So your career is doing great. You're nominated for an Academy Award for your first film, and then the blacklist years come.
Yes, by the time Detective Story came out, which was 1952, I guess. I couldn't work any place in film or television.
So tell us, who is J. Edgar
And
Bromberg?
that was my first play.
J. Edgar Bromberg. And how did
J.
he play
Edgar
a part in
Bromberg
that?
was a character actor who was in the second play that I went into. And he had been called in front of the House Un-American Activities Committee, and he was being called again while we were doing this play, and he said to me, I have a bad heart, they're killing me. And he took a play in London, and within the first week he died of a heart attack, and they had a memorial for J. Edgar Bromberg. He was 39 at the time. And they had a memorial for him at the Edison Hotel in New York City, and they asked me, as a new young actor, to speak at his memorial. And I said that I felt he had been driven to his heart attack by the House Un-American Activities Committee. And that weekend, a friend showed me my name on the blacklist. It took those remarks to go onto the list of Reds.
There was literally a magazine where your name would appear,
Yes,
right?
Red Channels was the name of it. And from that time on, until 12 years later, I couldn't work in film or television.
And the blacklist, just to be clear, the blacklist prevented your working, as you said, in film and television, did not affect working in the theater. Is
No.
that correct?
Theater, Actors Equity, and the Broadway producers had an agreement. There would be no blacklist on Broadway.
Now, still though, shortly after that happened, weren't you working on Search for Tomorrow, the television show?
Yes, we tried to get through on that. The director and the producers of the soap opera, which John is talking about, hired me in a little part. And at that time, soap opera, you went to work and you did your half hour at 10 o'clock in the morning, 10:30 it was finished, and you went home.
It was live, right?
It was live.
Yeah. Live television.
And my part was poisoning the heroin soup, and so I loved that. and then I came in one day. I managed to get away with it for like 2 months, and they had caught up with me, and one of the blacklisters who had a grocery store in Syracuse put up over his toothpaste counter, do you want to buy Colgate toothpaste from people who hire communists? That was supposed to be me on Search for Tomorrow. So.
That was it for TV?
Yeah, that was it for TV.
It is amazing to think how little it took to be put on the blacklist.
It took nothing, actually. It took nothing, and there were ways of getting off the blacklist. I mean, if you got up at a television union meeting and said, I am anti-communist and I'm on the side of this and this and this, and and you paid like a couple of $100, you could get off.
And what part did your husband play in all that, Arnie Manhoff, who you were married to at the time, in terms of getting you on the blacklist and keeping you there?
He was named. Arnie was named as a communist. And so were all of the friends I made when I married him. And these were names like Ring Lardner Jr. and who is the one that
Dalton Trumbo.
Dalton Trumbo. All of the great writers were called communists and couldn't work in film. And I had an enormous admiration for them. And they were the people I really sided with at the time, especially when I saw with Bromberg how brutally he was treated. That became my side. I was on that side.
And you talk in the book, I think it's really interesting, about an occasion where you testified with your attorney present for the committee, and the impressions you had of the men who were doing the questioning, and how ironically it was not unlike the kinds of questioning and treatment of artists that was going on in the Soviet Union.
Exactly.
And talk a little about
Exactly.
that for a minute, what that experience was like.
Well, of course, you know, at that time, the people, neither my husband nor his friends and the people I loved and admired had any idea what was going on in the Soviet Union. The fact that they were making bad movies of people on tractors and were killing poets and writers. None of this came out until Khrushchev, you know, turned Stalin in. What was I going to say?
Well, the men who were questioning you on the committee
Oh.
and how little they knew about your field.
But the people on the committee, on the House Un-American Activities Committee, were dummies. And they'd say, like, who is your agent? William Morris. Is he a communist? Do you know the William Morris Agency, any of you?
They didn't understand the difference in the meaning of agent.
No,
That was
no, you had
Russian
to have a
agent.
communist agent, you know, and they were so glad that I named him, that I turned him in, William Morris. So, I mean, they were so stupid and so bizarre that, you know, I was laughing while I was doing it. Fortunately, I had a great lawyer with me, you know, who took the Fifth Amendment when he needed to have me take the Fifth Amendment. And so I was protected. But the fact that they were asking about people who I worked with, who were directors, who I loved, and I was, you know, in my early 20s then. There was just a divide between that whole kind of mindset. It was the McCarthy period, you know, and the people I knew and them.
And you were on the blacklist for 12 years.
Yeah.
And then it sort of ended with a whimper, didn't it? When your name finally got taken off, when you met Max Kempelman.
Yes. The head of the Un-American Activities Committee had a favor to ask of this, you know, great lawyer in Washington, who became my lawyer for nothing. And he asked him for a favor, and Max said, "I'll give it to you if you take Lee off the blacklist." Mm-hmm. And so he said, "Okay."
And that was it.
So I got this letter saying I was a good citizen, and I went to work right away because, huh?
What was the favor?
I don't know what the favor was. You know, it was some political favor, you know. But that was it. It started with, you know, idiocy, and it ended with idiocy.
Now, around this time, you were appearing in a production of Electra for Joseph Papp on Broadway.
In the park,
In the park.
yes.
But you left abruptly when you got a phone call, right?
I left for Peyton Place when I got the phone call.
Television was calling.
Whoa, Stella Chernak, hey.
And he wasn't too happy with you, was he?
No, he was very angry, and he was absolutely right. My agent took the job. Mm-hmm. I could not have walked out on Joe myself. I owed him too much, and he was, you know, so wonderful to me. But she took the job, literally. She said, you know, you have a small child. My daughter was like 5 or 6 then, and you have no money. Yeah. You have to take this. I signed up for you. And so I did.
It's almost hard to imagine with what television is today, with all the channels and all the options we have, what a huge phenomenon Peyton Place was at that time. It was really the first nighttime soap opera.
Yes. Yeah.
And you were on how many nights a week?
Oh, Peyton Place was on 3 nights a week, live 3 nights a week. And then, of course, it had Mia Farrow and Ryan
O'Neill,
and Barbara
Parkins.
And, you know, it was just a huge hit.
But your character wasn't very nice, was
No. Stella Chernak came from the other side of the tracks.
Yeah. Yep, you tried to put Ryan O'Neal in jail. You testified at
Yes,
his
I did.
murder trial.
Well, it was my brother's, life was at stake.
Right. So was it fun doing that show?
It was so much fun. It was like, first of all, I was living in Malibu with my 6-year-old daughter in the colony with my boyfriend, cute Italian. Not
Who
bad.
we should say
huh?
became her husband.
Who has been my husband of 50 years now. Hey, Joey. Joe. So I mean, the fact that I was in that sunshine and that sand in the colony, I mean, free. It was like nothing had existed before then. It was such a change of life for me and for my daughter that it was unbelievable. It was like heaven.
And you really had an opportunity to reinvent yourself because you were very young when you were blacklisted.
Yes.
Unlike most of the other people who were blacklisted, you were very young. So even though 12 years had passed, you still had this opportunity.
I was in my 30s, and I lied about my age every chance I got. because in Hollywood, age matters. And I wrote about that in the book because I wrote it for myself. Mm-hmm. And the fact that I was so afraid that somebody would see my driver's license or that they'd say my birthday on radio. I had been so deprived of work for those 12 years that to keep working, I was crazy. I was frantic because I had a child to support.
It's almost like you wanted to get some of those lost years back.
I did. I don't think there's any question about it. I can't analyze myself, but I was the only blacklisted actor who had made it back.
And really had a much more successful film career after returning than you'd had before.
Well,
Because you'd only been in one film.
One movie.
Yeah, you'd only been in one movie. And not long after you were doing Peyton Place, you got an offer to be in the heat of the night, which is the film we're going to show here shortly. And that was a huge film for you, wasn't it? A great movie to have as your comeback film.
It was a great film. It was a great film. What was the one that you saw just now?
Saw Shampoo.
Oh, you saw Shampoo.
We're going to see in the heat of the night. Yeah. And a movie which, those of you who haven't seen it, you're in for a treat, but really holds up remarkably well. There were other movies made at the time, like Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, that on the subject of race relations.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But In the Heat of the Night holds up very, very well. And the director on the film was Norman Jewison.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And the editor was Hal Ashby.
Yeah.
And you're working with two tremendous actors, Rod Steiger and Sidney Poitier. What was that like?
Huh?
What was that like?
Well, I was a member of the Actors Studio, as was Rod, as was Sidney. So they were friends from New York. Mm-hmm. And they knew, of course, that was my first movie in California after the blacklist. So they were so over eager to welcome me and say we're so glad everything's okay and you're back and all that. And so that's what I felt. I felt that from all of them and from Norman Jewison. I didn't read for anything. He just said, I want you to play this part. And I did have the fragility at the time of what we had all gone through. And it did apply to the part I played in the film. So, I see looking back why they would say, she's right for this.
Well, and again, for those who haven't seen it, your character is the wife of the man who's murdered, whose murder Sidney Poitier ultimately helps to investigate. He's passing through the small southern town with a bigoted southern sheriff, Rod Steiger, who really doesn't want his help. But he's investigating your husband's murder. And Norman Jewison said that you had a very, very challenging task because your very first scene in the film is the one where you're informed that your husband's dead, and the audience doesn't know anything about you, and they're seeing you for the first time, learning that your husband has died. So what did you draw on in that scene? It's a very powerful scene, as you'll see. What did you draw on to be able to play that with Sidney Poitier?
You'll have to read the book.
Well, many folks will be reading the book, but I wonder, because we have talked about it, if the death of your own husband helped in that.
Well, helped is not a word I
Right.
use for it, but,
Yeah.
but it certainly applied.
Yeah, and Sidney Poitier was very collaborative with you in that scene, wasn't he?
Yes, and I had told John that scene was improvised.
Yeah.
That was what and Norman went with it, and the cinematographer was handheld with it, and Rod and Sidney had wanted me. I came that day. They wanted to have dinner that night, you know, as friends, and the scene was the next day, and so to not have any connection with them as friends. But to have Rod be the sheriff and have Sidney be this stranger was something that I, as a method actress, was working so hard on that, you know, I just blanked on everything but having the experience, you know.
And the film won the Academy Award for Best Picture. Rod Steiger won for Best Actor. And really was a very significant film for the time. Almost didn't get made because it dealt with a very sensitive subject of race relations. And again, your part in the film is kind of crucial, I think, because you're the one who insists that Sidney Poitier be allowed to investigate this crime. And very memorable scene, which you'll see, is...
Hey, don't tell them.
Don't tell them the scene?
Yeah,
Okay,
let them
don't
see
tell-
it.
Let them see it for themselves. So In the Heat of the Night established you as being back, so to speak, and you followed it up very quickly with another landmark film called Valley of the Dolls, but maybe for a different reason.
Yeah, let's hear it for Valley of the Dolls.
Yes. I think you've described it as the best, worst movie ever made.
Am I right?
So did you at least have fun playing in it?
Oh, sure. Oh, of course. I had fun in everything.
But did you and the other actors think of it as being a kind of campy movie, or?
No.
You took it very
God,
seriously?
No, yes. It was like the young leads in it thought this is going to catapult me into superstardom, you know, and this kind of, you know, when it opened, it was, you know, such a, you know, a great tacky movie that, you know, that a lot of careers went down.
But it continued to have a huge following as a
Yes,
cult film.
absolutely.
And I think you told me that you actually attended an event where they acted out.
Well, it was a gay version. And it was on stage, and they used only the lines that were in it, and you were falling off the seat laughing. It was so funny.
But that began really, I mean, the 70s were a very prolific decade for you.
Yeah.
You were in a lot of films. You were really making up for lost time almost, it seemed.
Yeah.
And,
Well, that's, you know, I said yes to everything.
You said yes
It's
to
not
everything.
apocryphal.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
I said yes to everything, including, I mean, Valley of the Dolls after, you know, the Sidney Poitier movie. What's the name
In
of it?
the Heat of the Night.
In the Heat of the Night. Yeah.
But so you did films, you did really a wide variety of films. You did,
Everything they asked me to do.
you know, you were in kind of a
did.
horror film, Damien Omen 2,
Yes.
and The Landlord, which was your film. So, but in the mid-'70s, along came Shampoo, which, of course, was the film for which you won the Academy Award. Now,
I've
That
been nominated a couple of
You've
times.
been nominated twice for Detective Story and The Landlord,
Yeah.
and then later on for Voyage of the Damned. But you almost didn't stay on Shampoo, did you? Because there was that guy we talked about before, the producer-writer, who attempted to direct you. Why don't you tell us about that
Well,
scene?
that's just gossip.
I read it here, which is a very authoritative source. And tell them the scene in question, because they've just seen the movie.
Oh, you've just seen the movie. So the scene where I come in with my hair up in the bandana, and I open the door to my daughter's room, to Carrie's room, and I see my daughter with Warren together. Well, he took me aside before we shot that scene, and he said, listen, when you open the door, you do not know what's going on between Carrie and me. I know, because I know women, and you know, I've had situations where I've been at a desk, a girl's been underneath it, you know, and my girlfriend comes by, she doesn't see it. She doesn't see a thing. I said, how do you know? He said, will you take it from me? I know women, I know this. So I go home that night, and I come in the next day, and I passed Hal Ashby, who's directing, and I said, I'm quitting. He said, okay. He's got a movie to direct. And so I sat on the steps, leading down the steps, and Warren came up to me, and I said, I'm quitting. He said, why? I said, because you're my hairdresser, and you're directing me. And my hairdresser doesn't direct me in a film. The director directs me. And he said, okay, all right, you don't want me to direct you? I won't direct you, okay. And from then on, it was as you saw it. It was peaches and cream.
So here's the postscript to this story. When the film came out, Pauline Kael reviewed it. Remember Pauline Kael, New Yorker magazine, Dean of New York Film Critics. Here's what Pauline Kael said. I just want to take a moment to read this. Lee Grant is such a cool style comedienne that she's in danger of having people say she's good as usual. But she carries off the film's most sexually brutal scene. Felicia comes home late for an assignation with George and discovers that while he was waiting for her, he has been occupied with her teenage daughter, and she still wants to go to bed with him. She wants it more than ever. So Pauline Kael got it.
She got it.
She must have known how women think.
That's right. John, yes. I mean, how could I explain that to Warren? I come there, I see that he's gone to bed with her, but I am so driven by the time I get to that house, and the way we did the scene after that, I didn't just pull my stockings down and got on top of him, You saw that, right?
So you win the Academy Award, your third nomination, you win it. And what did that mean for your career? Did it change in any way how you thought about taking roles? Did it change the kind of parts that came to you?
I think that was the end of my career. I think that was, I think everybody was pulling for me. And it had been a long pull, it had been a hard pull. And it was very important for me to win. It was like I was winning for my team, and my team wasn't there. And I think I knew that I could only slip downward from there, that the kind of parts that I would get would not be, and of course I got Airport 78 or whatever.
Well, Airport 77,
77.
Yeah. I mean, talk about that. That was, that you had to confront, as an actor, a very big fear that you had, didn't you, of water?
Well, of getting wet.
Of getting wet. And the setup, in case you all haven't seen Airport 77 at the Bryn Mawr Film Institute recently, which you probably have not, the setup for this particular film is that the plane crashes into the sea.
To the
and you're
bottom of
underwater,
the ocean.
The bottom of the sea. And once again, you're not a very nice character in the film, are you?
No,
Yeah. You were kind of complaining the whole time.
yes.
But as far as the water goes, the film called for the ocean to come rushing into the cabin or something?
You had to
or-
sit in your seat, and they had, you know, gigantic casks as big as you all are, and at the right time, they pulled the casks over, and the water fell all over the actor who's sitting in the seat, and they either live or die, you know. And you know, Olivia de Havilland, do you remember Olivia de Havilland? Well, you know, she did it, and I was so ashamed of the fact that I had gotten an understudy to do it, that I said, oh, you know, I'll do it. So
If Olivia de Havilland can do it,
if
you do it.
Olivia de Havilland could do it, I
Yeah.
could do it.
So, but you talked about Shampoo sort of being an end and a pinnacle, and you obviously continued to act in films, but you also continued to act in the theater and television. You had done a Columbo with Peter Falk, right? And then you acted with Peter Falk again in The Prisoner of Second Avenue on Broadway, right?
Yeah.
I know that was an important event for you in terms of something that happened near the end of the run of the play, where you had trouble with your lines. Talk about that a little bit, if you will, because that gets back to what you were talking about with the blacklist and your fear.
Well, it was the last week of the run of Prisoner of Second Avenue. It was a very, very successful run, and it was just Peter Falk and myself on stage. And I went up in the second act. Going up means you forget your lines. I just went up. And maybe I'd done it so many times, and it was a long monologue that I was in. And I really expected Peter to pick up and do his next line, and we go on. But Peter didn't know what to do. And so he turned to the audience, and he went pointing to me. And suddenly, you know, it was the Un-American Activities Committee, and somebody was turning me in. And he didn't know what to do. I mean, it wasn't his fault. He went up too. But it was psychologically a very, very frightening time for me. I didn't know how to go on with the play, and they brought the curtain down. And the surprise was that when it went up, there was an ovation from the audience, who felt very privileged to be let in on that moment of terror from both of us. But it was really from that time on that I did The Seagull after that, just to test myself, Chekhov's play. But I didn't have that anything goes kind of acting thing that surprise myself, you know, not surprise the audience, surprise myself, see what I'm going to do. I didn't have, it was like, you know, talent gone. It was before Shampoo, so it didn't affect the movies then, but it frightened me. And so my career in the theater was basically over. And I think when I got the Oscar for Shampoo, I think that I felt that I had come to the end of a line there also. And it was right after that the American Film Institute asked if I wanted to be a part of their first women's directing workshop. And yeah, I was interested. And so really from then on, it started a whole new phase for me. It was from then on, it was.
Well, it began yet another reinvention now as a director.
Yeah.
And so you did some work for the American Film Institute Women's Workshop, as you said. And I think was Wilmar 8 your first documentary?
Wilmar 8, yeah.
Talk about that a little bit. Really interesting subject matter, Wilmar 8.
Well.
And this was the late 70s, early 80s, somewhere in there?
It was, yes, it had to be
Yeah.
the late 70s. I had a friend, Mary Beth Yarrow, who had been married to Peter Yarrow at the time, the mamas and Peter, Paul, and Mary, not mamas and papas, Peter, Paul, and Mary. Okay, and so she came from Wilmer, Minnesota, and she read in the paper that these 8 women went on strike against the bank in Wilmer, Minnesota, because the president of the bank was having these women train young guys to be their bosses. And they should stay at the teller's windows. And when they asked why, the president of the bank said, well, you're women, you know. And so these 8 women went on strike, and you know the winters in Minnesota. I mean, I went out with a microphone to talk to people on the street, and nothing would come out of my mouth. It was so frozen. And these women were on strike for a year, marching back and forth in that kind of cold, because that guy at the bank would not let them rise above the position of teller. And interestingly, that documentary had a huge effect on the banking industry. And it changed the way women were treated in banking. And what it also did for me was open up an area where I didn't have to be afraid to speak, where that button that says, uh-oh, be careful, the blacklist, you know, where in making documentary films that I could explore what the situation was and tell the truth about it. And it was a real catharsis for me.
And you ended up making a television movie based on that called A Matter of Sex.
I found out that I could make the documentary and then go to the head of the television department and say, can we make this into a movie of the week? And so I did that with about three documentaries.
And so you were off with documentaries and with other directing work, both in television and movies and so on. Well, we want to be able to take a few questions from the audience. And we have Valerie Temple here with the microphone. So please raise your hands and Valerie will come to you.
We only have time for about 2 questions, so.
I'd like to go back to Shampoo. There were 3 high-powered ladies with Julie Christie and Goldie Hawn. I'd like to know how well the 3 of you got along. Also in the credits, why did someone come first? And normally, today, who came first, who came second, who came third, and you were on the second page, I noticed. I want to know how well and it just went, please.
Well, Goldie and I were best friends. You know, we had a long, close relationship where, you know, she was just a great friend and a cool girl. And Julie, I thought, was the most beautiful woman in the world. And she was as beautiful inside as she was out. She had gone with Warren. She had been his girlfriend for a lot of years. She wasn't by the time we did Shampoo. But it was just a love between us all. You know, it was a very, very loving cast. And Jack Warden, who played my husband, you know, he had been my friend from New York. You know, so it was, you know, very, very good.
First, I'd like to thank you for visiting with us tonight. This has been delightful. But I also wanted to ask you, is it true, speaking of age in Hollywood, is it true that Mayor Sam Yorty changed your driver's license for you? And how did that come about?
Well, you read that. You read it in my book. I turned myself in on that. I really had to. You know, it was just about time. It was just me sitting at my desk writing, you know, at the window. I had to turn myself in. And I asked him, we set up an actor studio in Hollywood. And I made an appointment with Mayor Yorty to ask him if the actor studio could have that building free. And while I was at it, I said, you know, they made a mistake on my driver's license. and you know, I just wish somebody could do something about it. And so he said, well, what kind? And I said, well, they made me 5 years older than I am. You know what this means in this town, Sam. So he said, well, you know, can I do anything? Would you? And so he did. He took 5 years off my age, and oh, wow. It was like, you know, money from the bank.
Just an example of the many fascinating anecdotes in I Said Yes to Everything. Thank you so much for being here. You've been such a delight.
Thank you, Lee. Thank you, Lee. Thank you, Roberta. Thank you all for coming. Stay for In the Heat of the Night. If you haven't seen it for a while, it is a marvelous movie. And we hope we will get Lee back to do a whole series on her documentaries.
Yes. Whoa, that would be cool. Thank you, sweetheart.